The first sign that something was wrong wasn't the knock. It was the light. At exactly the kind of hour when the countryside feels completely abandoned, the motion-sensing patio light outside our house suddenly flooded the yard with a harsh yellow glow. Out on my family's ranch in rural Colorado, that light never came on without a reason. There were no sidewalks, no passing traffic, and no neighbors wandering by after midnight. If it switched on, someone, or something big enough to trigger it, was standing outside. Years later, I still remember how quickly the silence around the house changed. Before moving to California on my own, I had spent most of my life on my dad's ranch. The property stretched farther than you could comfortably walk, surrounded by open fields, fences, and cattle. Most people thought it sounded peaceful. To me, it often felt isolating. Beautiful during the day, sure, but once darkness settled over those endless acres, every sound seemed louder, and every shadow felt like it had a purpose. My dad understood that better than anyone. We'd had strangers trespass before. More than once, people had wandered onto the property without permission, and one incident had become family legend after Dad chased 2 men away with his rifle. Because of things like that, he kept 3 firearms in the house and made sure everyone knew where they were in case of a real emergency. At the time, though, I never imagined I'd actually need one. It happened sometime in the middle of June. My parents had left for a vacation together, and my younger brother was spending the night with friends, or maybe at his girlfriend's house. I honestly can't remember which. What I do remember was that I had the entire ranch to myself. The evening had been unusually warm for Colorado, warm enough that I'd opened every window in the house to let whatever breeze existed drift through the rooms. I had always been a night owl, so while most people were asleep, I was stretched out in the living room watching television with the volume low enough that I could still hear the sounds outside. Crickets chirped without interruption. Occasionally, the wind brushed through the grass beyond the yard. Everything felt completely ordinary. Then, sometime around 1 in the morning, the patio light clicked on. I glanced toward the window almost automatically. My brother, I muttered to myself. That seemed like the only logical explanation. Maybe he'd gotten home earlier than expected. Maybe he'd walked up from the driveway without texting first. Just to be safe, I stood up and looked through the front window. No one. The porch stood completely empty beneath the bright light. I frowned and reached for my phone, calling my brother. The call rang and rang before going unanswered. That left an uncomfortable silence hanging over the room. Trying not to overthink it, I lowered the phone and sat back down. Only a few seconds later, someone knocked on the front door. The knock wasn't loud, but it was deliberate. 3 steady taps echoed through the quiet house, each one clear enough to make me pause the television without even thinking about it. Out on a ranch like ours, nobody stopped by unexpectedly in the middle of the night. Anyone who drove all the way out there had a reason for coming. The front door had a peephole for exactly that reason. I crossed the living room slowly, trying to convince myself that my brother was about to pull some stupid prank. Leaning forward, I looked through the peephole. Nothing. The porch was empty. I blinked and looked again, expecting someone to jump into view laughing. Still nothing. Ding-dong ditch. I whispered, though even saying it out loud sounded ridiculous. There weren't enough people living nearby for neighborhood kids to play games like that, and nobody would drive miles into the middle of nowhere just to knock on a stranger's door. The uneasy feeling creeping into my stomach refused to leave. I stepped away from the door and closed the blinds over the front windows. If someone really was outside, I suddenly didn't like the idea of them watching me while I couldn't see them. Pulling out my phone again, I sent my brother a quick text. If I find out it's you, I'm not letting you in. For a moment, everything became quiet again. I had barely slipped the phone back into my pocket when an explosive bang erupted directly behind me. The sound was so sudden and so close that I actually jumped away from the couch. Someone had slammed a fist against the living room window. Before I could even process it, 2 voices spoke at exactly the same time. One belonged to a man with a deep, unmistakable voice. The other sounded like a woman. Together, they said only 4 words. "We see you." Every muscle in my body locked up. For a split second, my brain desperately searched for an explanation that made sense. Maybe my brother had come home after all. Maybe his girlfriend was with him, and they had somehow circled around the house just to scare me. It wasn't impossible. At least, that's what I wanted to believe. The pounding continued. Whoever was outside wasn't staying in one place. The knocking shifted away from the living room and moved toward another side of the house. I followed the sound until I realized it had reached the dining room window. Unlike the others, I hadn't closed those blinds. From where I stood, I could just barely make out two human figures standing beyond the glass. They weren't illuminated enough for me to see their faces, only dark silhouettes, completely still, watching. A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the night air. Every instinct told me not to stand there any longer. Without taking another look, I turned and sprinted upstairs toward my father's bedroom, knowing exactly where he kept the rifle he had shown me years earlier for emergencies. For the first time in my life, I realized this might actually be one. My heart pounded so hard that I could hear it over my own footsteps as I rushed into my dad's bedroom. The house suddenly felt much larger than it had only minutes earlier. Every hallway seemed darker. Every doorway seemed to hide another unknown. Dad had shown me exactly where he kept one of his rifles years before. At the time, it had seemed like nothing more than practical advice. Living on a remote ranch meant being prepared for emergencies, whether it was a wild animal or an unwanted visitor. I never imagined I would actually be searching for it in the middle of the night. I dropped to one knee beside the bed and reached underneath. My fingers brushed against cold metal. For the first time since the knocking had started, I felt a small sense of control returning. I pulled the rifle out, loaded it exactly the way my father had taught me, and took a slow breath to steady my shaking hands. I wasn't an experienced marksman, and I certainly wasn't looking for a confrontation. But standing there defenseless suddenly seemed like the worst option. Holding the rifle tightly, I made my way back downstairs. The dining room window came into view. The two figures were gone. I stayed frozen for several seconds, expecting them to reappear from the darkness. Nothing moved beyond the glass. The yard was silent again, as though whoever had been watching me had vanished into the night without making a sound. That silence was somehow even more unsettling. I considered locking myself upstairs until morning, but another thought kept pushing its way into my mind. What if they were still somewhere on the property? The ranch wasn't just our home. It was my family's livelihood. Our cattle were spread across nearby pastures, and if someone had trespassed before, there was no guarantee they had come only to frighten me. The rifle gave me enough confidence to make a decision I probably wouldn't have made otherwise. I unlocked the front door and stepped outside. Warm night air met me immediately, carrying the familiar scent of dry grass and dust. The motion light still illuminated the porch, but beyond its reach the ranch disappeared into a sea of darkness. I scanned the yard carefully. Nothing. Keeping the rifle pointed safely downward but ready, I walked a quick circle around the house. Every few steps I stopped and listened. Crickets chirped in the fields, and somewhere farther away a cow shifted its weight, breaking the silence for only a moment. The fences looked untouched. The cattle appeared calm. No voices, no footsteps, no movement. After completing one full lap around the house, I finally returned inside. I locked every door, checked each window twice, and carried the rifle upstairs with me. Eventually, I lay down on my parents' bed, placing the rifle within arm's reach. For nearly 30 minutes, the ranch remained completely still. Then the silence exploded. A horrifying scream ripped through the darkness outside, followed instantly by violent pounding against the front door below. The pounding hit the front door with such force that it sounded as if someone was trying to break it off its hinges. I bolted upright before I was even fully awake. For a split second, I couldn't remember where I was. Then another deafening crash echoed from downstairs, followed by a sound that froze me in place. A man was screaming, not shouting words, not calling for help, just screaming. The raw, desperate noise echoed across the ranch, rising and falling without any recognizable pattern. It was loud enough to drown out the crickets outside, loud enough to make the entire house feel as though it were vibrating with every frantic blow against the door. My pulse surged. Whoever was outside wasn't pretending anymore. I grabbed the rifle from beside the bed and rushed toward the upstairs living room window, careful not to stand directly in front of it. Every instinct told me that if someone had already circled the house once, they could be watching for movement inside. The screaming continued. Another heavy slam rattled the front entrance. I eased the window open just enough to look into the darkness beyond the porch. The night swallowed almost everything outside the reach of the motion light. The ranch, which had seemed peaceful only an hour earlier, now looked endless and hostile. Every shadow blended into the next until it was impossible to tell where the yard ended and the open fields began. I couldn't clearly see who was down there. I only knew they hadn't left. The pounding came again. My hands tightened around the rifle. Every possible outcome raced through my mind. If someone forced their way inside, I would have nowhere to retreat. The nearest neighbors were far away, and even if I called for help, it would take time for anyone to reach the ranch. I made my decision, leaning out just enough to keep a safe distance from the window. I pointed the rifle away from the house and fired a warning shot into the darkness. The crack of the gunshot shattered the night. For a heartbeat, everything stopped. The screaming ended instantly. The pounding ceased. Then, cutting through the silence, I heard exactly what I had hoped and feared. Footsteps. Not one person. Two. They pounded across the wooden porch in hurried succession before fading rapidly into the darkness beyond the yard. I stayed perfectly still, listening. The footsteps grew fainter, then disappeared completely. Nothing followed. No more voices. No more knocking. No more movement. Only the familiar chorus of crickets slowly returned, as if the ranch itself had been holding its breath until the strangers were finally gone. I kept the rifle close, refusing to move away from the window for a long time. Whoever those people were, they had come to the house together. They had watched me through the windows. And now, after that single gunshot, they had vanished without leaving behind a single answer. I didn't sleep again for the rest of the night. Even after the footsteps faded into the distance, I remained awake with the rifle resting across my lap, listening to every sound the ranch offered. The crickets had returned, the breeze drifted through the open fields, and somewhere in the distance a cow let out a low call. Under any other circumstances, those familiar sounds would have been comforting. That night, they only reminded me how isolated I really was. Every few minutes, I found myself looking toward the windows, expecting another shadow to appear or another knock to shatter the silence. It never happened. The hours crawled by. Eventually, the black sky began to soften into gray as the first light of morning spread across the property. From the upstairs window, everything looked perfectly normal. The yard was empty. The porch showed no sign of the chaos that had unfolded only hours before. The motion light had long since switched itself off, and the ranch looked as peaceful as it always had. But I knew what I had heard. I knew someone had been outside. After the sun came up, I finally put the rifle away and walked through the house one last time, checking every door and window. Everything was still locked. Nothing appeared to be missing or damaged. Whoever those two people were, they had disappeared as suddenly as they had arrived. Later that day, I finally got in touch with my younger brother. The first thing I asked was whether he and his girlfriend had decided to play some elaborate prank on me. He looked completely confused. He hadn't come home that night. Neither had his girlfriend. In that instant, the explanation I had been clinging to disappeared. The two figures outside my house had been strangers. When my parents returned from their vacation, I told my dad everything from beginning to end. The motion light, the knocks at the front door, the voices outside the window, the silhouettes watching from the darkness, and the terrifying screaming that ended only after I fired the warning shot. Instead of criticizing me for grabbing his rifle, he nodded quietly. He told me I had protected the property exactly as he had hoped I would if a genuine emergency ever happened. Living so far from town meant help wasn't minutes away. Sometimes, the responsibility of keeping the house and family safe rested entirely on the people inside it. Nothing like that ever happened again. No more late-night knocks. No more strangers circling the house. No more voices whispering through the windows. Not until I eventually moved away from the ranch and started a new life in California. Even now, I still think about those two people from time to time. I have no idea why they chose our property, what they wanted, or what might have happened if I hadn't known where my father's rifle was kept. The questions have never been answered. One thing, however, has never left me. Before that night, I understood why my dad owned those guns. After that night, I understood why he insisted everyone in the family